Today's prompt that I'll be performing for you for extemporaneous speaking is President Biden creating a foreign policy that is too friendly to Iran? I'll count myself off in 3, 2, 1. In the global communities, one of the most recognizable allies between two countries in the world has most likely been the United States and Iran. However, the relationship has transformed throughout the years, beginning in 1953, where the United States CIA assisted the People's Republic Party of Iran in overthrowing the dictatorship government and forming a democracy. Let's fast forward to the year 2000, about 50 years later, where U.S. interest and presence in Iran began to escalate, along with the conflict between the two countries. With the proxy war beginning in the Middle East after 9/11, Iran's country began to gain tension between the United States and Iran. However, the governments still remained strong together and still tried to coordinate together combating terrorism in the region. However, let's fast forward to 1 year ago in 2020, when Iran shot 2 ballistic missiles at U.S. military bases in Saudi Arabia and U.S. naval carriers in the Persian Gulf. This escalated conflict and removed the position of interest of the U.S. and Iran entirely. In this instance, we see Iran, once a U.S. ally, becoming an adversary, which is why today I will be outlining for you foreign policy in Iran, and the question of, is President Biden's initiative in the Middle East being too easy on the country of Iran? Firstly, I'll be focusing on why this foreign policy that President Biden is initiating is going to help initiate foreign policy and reduce tensions needed to prevent further conflict and war in the region. Secondly, how this easier policy and being nice to Iran can help encourage bipartisan support in the establishment of relationships in the U.S. Congress. And finally, how increasing foreign relations with Iran once more could potentially end the proxy war and reduce the usage of nuclear arsenals. Firstly, let's focus on rising tensions in Iran. According to the Committee on Foreign Relations, from September 2019, Iranian and U.S. military presence increased exponentially after the Iranian government used ballistic missiles to shoot down U.S. military carriers in the sky, B-52s. In that instance, we saw 14 U.S. lives were lost, and this is what started a proxy war between the U.S. and Iran on Iranian soil. And it's just this conflict could have been combated if there was a foreign policy in place. However, from the previous Trump administration, we saw this being negated and neglected, which is what resulted in almost a full-blown conflict that took place. While we were able to completely reduce war in the area, it almost created and it almost came out. In this instance, there could have been a war in the region, an unnecessary war where we would have saw lives and bloodshed increased without any further reason. Which is why, with President Biden's present plan to increase foreign relationships with Iran once more, could prevent further conflicts such as this one. By establishing a diplomatic deal with the Secretary of State and the International Committee of Foreign Relations with the United States, we have an opportunity to once again increase our presence in Iran, but not through military presence, but through a diplomatic one. Secondly, another one of the clear positives of the U.S. having increased presence in Iran through President Biden's new foreign policy is a possibility to establish bipartisan support in Congress. Presently, after the passing of the coronavirus relief package, according to the New York Times, the Congress is divided, especially between Republicans and Democrats. Republicans have shared and supported overwhelming support for a deal in Iran to increase foreign policy and reduce U.S. military presence. In doing so, President Biden could not only appeal and keep his promise of building back better and working with both sides of Congress, but also end military presence and conflict in Iran, and once more find a peaceful resolve for a long and bloody battle that has been taking place in the region. By having bipartisan support for this bill and establishing a diplomatic deal that allows for the institution of a U.S. embassy in the region, according to the Associated Press in 2019, the U.S. and Iran could once again restructure their relationship that provides key military support in a region for U.S. to have an eye on their foreign adversaries in the region. Which is why, while people believe President Biden's treatment of Iran to be a little bit too nice, especially with the recent conflict, I believe it to be differently. As the information supports it, we would once again be able to prevent military conflict and also increase bipartisanship in Congress. Finally, one of the biggest issues that has been facing the U.S. and Middle Eastern regions has been the continuing proxy war. Whether between Iran, Syria, Israel, Palestine, or Russia, the proxy war in the region has decimated the region and taken millions of lives. Unless we want to continue taking lives in the region, we need to combat and end this proxy war. Which is why, according to the New York Times in February of 2021, a nuclear deal, a trade deal, and an economic institutional deal could prevent further conflict. By providing Iran with economic support from the United States and lifting the present embargoes that exist on imported goods, the U.S. would have increased economic relationships, allowing for American corporations to once again take hold in Iran and increasing U.S. consumerism. Secondly, by having diplomatic and military presence in the area, we could reduce the usage of nuclear arsenals. Nuclear arsenals are one of the biggest issues facing the global community today, especially because if a nuclear war broke out, there's a high likelihood that millions of lives would be lost. By reducing nuclear arsenals in both the United States and Iran, we reduce one of the two most powerful nuclear presences in the world. And having a trade deal and a foreign policy deal with them under the Biden administration would do exactly that. Which is why, in conclusion, while many believe that President Biden is being a little bit too easygoing on Iran, we have an opportunity to reduce military conflict in the region, but also to help end a proxy war that has taken millions of lives. We see most recently with the present conflict going on with Syria, that the U.S. lives will continue to be lost, and the American public has shared their overwhelming support to decrease the U.S. presence in Iran. But while we can decrease military presence, we should also ensure and work to increase diplomatic presence and economic presence. Because as the world becomes smaller, as countries become more divided but also closer in economic standings, we have the opportunity to end proxy war, end conflict, and end the deaths of millions of Americans and millions of Iranians that have taken place in the past few years. Thusly, while many believe President Biden's present treatment of Iran to be too easy, it is exactly the opposite. It encourages bipartisanship, encourages cooperation between the global community, and ends further lives from ever being lost again. Thank you.